What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ladies Who Brunch, the podcast where we have all of the conversation that they say you shouldn't have at the dinner table. But at the brunch table, baby, anything goes. I am your host, Julissa Contreras, and this week I'm hella hype because years ago, I want to say this was like in beginnings of COVID, there was this page that was just spitting truth about DR and Haitian relations. And I'm like, damn, what is in culture company? What is this space? And I felt like I was learning so much. And just for those who don't know, when I went to college, I studied Latina studies, right? It wasn't called that, it was called something else. I'm calling it Latina studies. But in that study was where I had first learned more about Dominican history because, hello, New York City kids, they weren't sitting down and teaching the nuance of Caribbean diaspora and history. And so where I was well studied, it really sort of floored me how much more learning I had to do and how this page was just really radicalizing more of what I needed to learn. And I was hooked. Then there's always faces and people who make these things come to life. And there was one person in particular who came to the surface, again, through socials and mutuals and community. And I was like, wow, what a powerful, educated change maker. And I've been wanting to talk to her forever. And this moment is just like feels really full circle. And community, I have to say, this is a treat. And there's a lot that we can learn from this person. So, Salvi, who the fuck are you?
Thank you so much, Elisa. Thank you for this invitation. It's really delightful for me. So, first of all, I am an immigrant. I am a queer person. I am a family member, a daughter, community member, and I'm a change maker. I'm interested in maximizing my time on this planet to get as much radical social change to happen in my community and the world beyond because we only have so much time on this earth. And what are we doing if we're not trying to leave it better than we found it? So that's me, core.
I love that. I mean, that's a powerful last core to have, and it very much shines through your work. I introduced you as Sally, pero es doctora, right? And I would love to hear a little bit about what put you on your path to becoming a doctora in these social studies that really, I think, create a strong backbone for the work that you're
Mhm.
doing and allows people to lean in to a certain level of trust in what you're saying that is more than just someone's social experience. You have the facts.
Thanks a lot for that. Thank you for putting some respect on my doctor name. So I'm a trained anthropologist, and what that means is that I study human social behavior, and I really put it in conversation with the longer arc of our species history on this planet, which is very long, millions of years. And so I'm very interested in these patterns of human behavior, but I think I got that interest because I grew up in a very multicultural environment. Like I said, I'm an immigrant. I came to New York City in 2003. My family settled in Flushing, Queens, which is a very diverse part of Queens. It's like the most diverse, probably the most diverse part of like the entire country, to be honest. We always get those little bragging rights. And I grew up with friends from all kinds of cultural backgrounds, very different cultural backgrounds from me, and it made me curious about this thing called culture. It made me want to understand how the group that we perceive ourselves to be a part of, how that shapes the way we behave. And so I went to college and, I studied education, but I also studied anthropology. And I was part of a group called the Mellon Fellowship, which encourage higher study, and they encourage grad school to become a professor. So that's what I did. And ultimately, I decided to study racial capitalism and the 20th century history of the Dominican Republic. I'm well versed on the entire history because of the work of Encultured, but I'm well versed in like post Trujillo history of the DR and political economy of the DR. So I can talk more about that. But that's a little bit about me in terms of my academic background.
Yeah, and then just in terms of you, the human, right, behind the work, I'd love to hear what are the things that excite you, inspire you, and keep you motivated in showing up the way that you do?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So I'm a very active person. People maybe don't know that about me, but I'm like a gym rat. Like I love working out. I love my Peloton, which you could probably see in the background, maybe not, right? But I am very athletic. So like I really get motivated and like enjoy a lot of movement, whether that's like yoga or spinning, running, walking, lifting. So like on a base level, like if I haven't moved that day, I'm probably gonna be cranky. I think another thing that keeps me going a lot are like these micro communities that I'm a part of outside of the encultured community. So, there is the encultured community, there is a team of like 15 people, 12 to 15 people at any given time, and we're very close. But there's also other kind of micro communities that I'm also a part of, like, my college friend group, my like women's circle that I'm a part of, some friends in the neighborhood where I live, some people I met playing sports here and where I live. So I have all these like little micro communities that I always feel connected to. And then my best friend Vanessa is also a really huge source of inspiration for me. So I have all these like forms of nourishment. I'm also a very nerdy person. Like I love to read. So like there's never a point when I'm like bored. And so that makes me feel all of that makes me feel very grounded.
I think oftentimes, especially people who consider themselves social justice warriors, they don't find the time to breathe and like live a life in addition to the work that they are carrying, right? And I think you can sort of have your cake and eat it too to some regards, and that self-fulfillment actually strengthens the work that you're doing, that especially if you are on the front lines of some of that work. It's not easy. And even being, on platforms that are online, like all the bullshit that you have to deal with and all the ignorance that comes your way, being able to decompress. Like if you're arguing with somebody who's like a DR nationalist who's going really hard and just spewing a lot of hate, getting some reps in after is super helpful rather than sitting with that and not letting that energy transmute anywhere. And so thank you for framing that, because I always love to remind us who are on the front lines, we have to still live our lives, and experiencing joy is still an act of resistance, because to be in this like fight, 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 fight mode doesn't always get us as far as we
I've
think.
also been doing this work for a very long time. Before in culture, I was part of other groups, which I can dive into. So I guess I like grew up in this work from when I was like 21 till now. So I feel like there's never been a point in time when I haven't been doing some version of this work. And so I've had to just learn how to be balanced in that because it's just my life.
Mhm, mhm. And that it's a long game. It's not just the sprint. And I think it's beautiful to even say I've been part of many communities. While there may be certain people that know me from this one community, one movement alone does not make, the foundation that you're speaking from. You're really speaking from a wealth of knowledge that is built by not only reading and studying, but being in community with people in real time, which is incredibly important. And another thing that I would stress to people who are like, oh, yeah, well, I'm not a social justice warrior. Maybe you're not, but maybe you are in ways that you're not recognizing, because the title and what you assume that title is limited. But the ways in which we share space and hold space in community, even if that is holding space for joy or creative expression, which is really where I sit in things, it's like that matters and that counts. And we need people in all intersections of our social justice works. They're super important. I would love to pivot a little bit and go into some Bronche questions with you, just so we understand how Saudi shows up at brunch. So tell us, what is your favorite brunch plate and drink?
That's so good. So I'm like I love a like savory and sweet combo person. So like I will always get just like eggs and bacon and something sweet. Like I will be as basic as that, but I just love like a sweet salty combo. So I really love a chicken and waffle situation because you get like that is like my brunch palette, like I want something sweet, I want something salty. So definitely chicken and waffle.
Especially if that chicken is fried to perfection, like always, always hits. What are you drinking with your chicken and waffles?
So I feel like I wanted to at first be like I'm like just a mimosa. That's just a classic brunch drink. But I've been really trying to get into martinis lately, and I've been really enjoying some really good ones. So I think I would actually go for like a martini, like some kind of fruit based martini with my chicken and waffle.
So my favorite liquor is gin. Like a lot of people like to do vodka martinis, but give me a little gin martini. I'm learning to like the olives. When people are like, "Oh, give me a dirty with olives." I'm trying, but I'm hearing you say fruit, and I'm like, I don't think it ever occurred to me, or I haven't seen it available where it's like fruity. I think I'm going to try that out. Thank you for the recommendation. So tell us, what is your favorite bochinche topic to discuss over your bronche meal?
Oh, that's a good one. So, I mean, everyone's really messy love lives. Duh. Like, what else? Like, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about, but it's like, everyone's messy love life, right? Like now some people in my circle are engaged and, getting married or are married. So, there's a little bit less of that because people are now engaged and married, so it's less messy. But yeah, like what's everybody up to in terms of their love life? I feel like that's always a fun topic.
Absolutely. Like, I grew up in an age where like Primer Impacto and Gorda y la Flaca and all these shows were always on the TV. So like I feel like I unintentionally, unconsciously inherited that part of the chisme where as much as I'm trying to be like, oh, all right, let's not talk about that. I love talking about that. I love talking about relationships. I love talking about sex. Like, you know what I mean? All of these things that I think are part of our social sphere that are important for us to talk.
Yeah, and like, these are not things that like I talk about in my public life because I'm not gonna, I'm also Scorpio, so I'm like extra, extra
Mm.
private. So like my people know me very well because I have long chats with my friends. But in like the public sphere, like it's less likely that I'm gonna talk about any of that. So I guess it's like brunch is like a cathartic place, or like happy hour or dinner is a great place to just like let it all out because I don't get to talk about these things, on social media or anything like that.
Absolutely. Es que son demasiado chismosos online. I don't want them knowing those parts
I don't
of
wanna be problematic.
yeah, I can try to use it against you and like cross, you're trying to make a good point and they're like, "Oh, but you da da da." Mind your business. One does not have anything to do with the other.
Yeah.
Uh, I respect the privacy, and I'm also a water sign. I'm a Pisces, so I get it. I get it. So tell me a little bit about what it was like going out to eat for you when you were growing.
Yeah, that's a great question because my family wasn't a very going out to eat family. Like we were very working class, very low income. So going out to eat was like this big treat. And instead of necessarily like putting money into going out to eat like once a week or something, my father always brought home takeout from his restaurants that were near his job. So it was like Italian food or like Szechuan Chinese food, which we really liked, but my family invested our money into doing things for the bigger family, like for the more extended family. So the $200 or the $100 or whatever that we would have spent going out to eat, we would instead spend on like a birthday party so that our apartment could be filled with people and they could be enjoying themselves. And it was like, 25 people having a good time instead of just the five of us. It's a very, like, a maybe immigrant thing that, like, going out to eat is not necessarily what we do. There's always food at home, but we do invest in, like, a good, like, family gathering.
When you think about outings, or I think culturally, my family's both parents from DR as well, and there is something to, yes, we are welcome in this American fabric and there are places we can go to socialize, but the full boisterousness that we have, the ways in which we really want to take up space, there's a lot of restaurants who can't even accommodate that. I mean, I think about sometimes where my family tries to get together and it's like we basically have to rent half the restaurant if we're all gonna go, right? We don't all fit. I don't know. It's very powerful to say, like, I'm gonna open up my home and allow myself to have these social gatherings. And also, like my mom likes to say, yo cocino mejor que esos restaurantes. Like, and so sometimes the actual community does provide a richer experience than that of going out to eat at this stage in our lives, like with our social circles outside of family, we are able to indulge a little bit and have some of that, but we stay true to our roots of what it really means to gather and have valuable quality time with people.
Yeah, I have to say I didn't go out to eat until I was in college.
Yeah.
Like, I went away for college. My dorm floor, we were very close, and we would go out to the Indian restaurant that had like a Sunday buffet, and that was our going out to eat. Or we would go down to the mall and, like, go to the mall and have food there. But I didn't really, like, do that until I was already much older. So it's very interesting, this question.
100%, which is why I love to ask it because similarly to you, began really going out to eat like in adulthood where it was with me with my money, but like otherwise it was like friends' birthdays if we were getting invited. I remember one time I got invited to a birthday party at Olive Garden and I thought that was a huge deal. You
Yeah.
know, like today you can't take somebody to Olive Garden and impress them, but
It would be
hey,
insulting if you take them to Olive Garden.
you know, but before it was less about the food and more about this idea of like, oh, I'm getting to go out and just to eat and have this meal. And I remember every time I would go out to eat when I was younger again, which was mostly out of somebody else's celebration, looking up the prices and being like, how much for a plate, and being blown away in that mindset, not even of not having enough and lack mentality, but more so like resourceful mentality where I'm like, you know what we can make with this money? You know how much people we
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's come a long way for me because I am a restaurant girly. I love to go out to eat.
Yes.
I am a fan, so, there is a budget for that in my life now.
Absolutely. And rightfully so. We have earned. We have earned the right to go out to eat for sure. Now we are going to move into our cheers section where we shout out dope people, brands, or anything that we think is dope right now. And I want to give a shout out to those of us, and I include myself in this group of people who are out here making it. Living our own lives, taking new shape despite the colonial capitalist frameworks that have molded our lives, and not just our lives, but the generations that have molded us and raised us. It is not easy out here to be a baddie who supports things like democratic socialism or anything that feels just out of the fold of the norm, which to me just feels very human centered, which is always my biggest gripe where I'm like, I shouldn't be battling so much to just show up in community as a good human. What's the fucking beef? You know what I mean? And so that takes a certain level of resilience. And I would include you in that group of people who are really out here paving that road and being a strong model. And so I'm curious, how are you living your best life despite the challenging work that you're doing?
I I've had to intentionally invest in my well-being because I did have a burnout episode in 2020 that was really intense. I was part of the February protest movement of 2020 in Dominican Republic. That was a protest movement centered on something similar to what's happening in the US at the moment, which is a loss of democracy in the country, with the government claiming these elections are fraudulent. The voter machine was faulty, so we're gonna cancel these elections. And young people rose up and said, "Hell no! Like, we're going to rise up for our democracy and against this fraud." And so I was part of that movement 5 years ago, and I experienced severe burnout from like days and days of doing mutual aid and coordinating the protests and all of that. So since then, I've had to be very intentional and careful about my well-being. So I'm like very focused on all my practices that help me, like drinking water. I'm going to drink water right now.
Yes, that's okay. On deck.
Yeah.
Always.
Drinking water and going on walks and making sure my bills are paid on time, because you know what? There is no better sense of well-being than financial security is actually a foundation of well-being. I think anxiety comes from a place of not knowing what's going to happen with your life or with your bills or with your housing. So I really focus on that, as well as like the working out, the body movement, the skincare, right? Like the good nutritious food I cook at home. And then of course, like I said, having these micro communities of people who are really loving, really sweet, really generous, good vibes all around. Is that you wanted me to shout out what, like things I'm loving?
Yes,
Is that
please. What's
something?
your shout out? Please. Yeah.
Or so I mean, I have so many great shout outs. There are like organizations that I love, of course, like I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm a card carrying, dues paying socialist, which I love because there's 88,000 of us in the US. It is not a small community, it is large and it's very diverse. I'm also a member of the Working Families Party, which is the party that's securing, like the real third party securing victories, real victories for working people in this country. I have to shout out Beam, the Black Emotional Health Project because they're doing great work with Black diasporic people all over the hemisphere, really, including supporting and culture, right, in the work that we're trying to do. I have to shout out as well St. James Libation, which is a new space that opened in Brooklyn, in Bushwick. They're a Black queer woman owned bar and they're doing amazing stuff. They're always packed and busy. We love them. We actually hosted something with them yesterday. We're going to be hosting more things there. I have to shout out Antilles Cafe. Like been a fan of them since day one. Antilles Cafe is a Dominican and Haitian co-founded and owned cafe that has just cultivated a beautiful corner of Brooklyn that brings so many people together and that is just a site of so much beautiful relationship building connections and good food. Um, I also have to shout out, I mean, like, there's so many other things, but I feel like this is a good place to start.
It's important to see that these are like ecosystems. These are spaces in Brooklyn that allow you to activate community, that you can have a presence in a space where somebody could be walking by and something might catch their eye and you can engage them into this community building. The intersections of our advocacy really does happen sometimes in those small moments, in those interactions that happen after you've been twerking, shaking ass in one corner with somebody, and then you fall into the circle where somebody is talking about a local election, and then you get to turn that part of yourself on and you build community in these ways as well. So I think it's so important to know about these spaces as well as spaces like Beam, anything that has to do with our wellness, our mental health, our physical health, right? That stamina that we do need to build for the long game, again, whether it is that we are out here advocating for others or just trying to sustain living our own lives,
Yeah.
be hard enough, which is hard enough. Like understanding all of these spaces and what they do is super key. So thank you for sharing all of that with us.
Living under capitalism is really rough. Like, it's really hard. Like, I marvel at the ways that, like, my parents, they navigated it and, without complaint and, like, somehow, with the working class jobs that they had, managed to give me and my siblings a good life. And I find that to be incredible because it's rough. Like, and, like, the pressure keeps going up. Decade after decade, things in the US become less sustainable as we're dealing with right now. People are just, we are tamataki with like the price of everything. And so I marvel at our parents who were able to somehow kind of protect some of us from that level of poverty and that level of risk and precarity. When you don't know you poor, like you're like, "Okay," you kinda keep it moving. So I'm sending, like, extra love to the parents who are trying to make it right now, make good lives for their children under these really bad conditions.
Yeah, 100%. And I always love to say the personal is political. So a lot of times we're like, I don't have to, like, once we start talking politics and talking about, oh, relations between people are like, shut it off. I have enough that I'm thinking about. I have enough that I'm carrying. And like, valid, right? That there is a way in which sometimes having certain blinders up is helpful to allow you to move forward. And the engagement of politics, so to speak, can just be the engagement of investigating why is my circumstance what it is. If I am showing up as a good citizen of the world, hardworking and putting in so much input, why is there such a lack of output in what I am doing? And even in the investigation of what is happening to you in your life and your four walls is radical to investigate, is to say, like, all right, who knows how to help me? Who knows how to support? And then that's when leaders can come up and say, all right, you might not know all the logistics of our political system or the full history of this politician who's running for office and doing these things. But like, we are here to be a resource because we hear you and we see you beyond what you do or don't know about politics. I find that a lot of times people are afraid to engage it because they feel like they're not educated enough and thus they should completely disengage. Whereas, again, going into the personal allows for you to understand, well, what if I only have an ounce of time to really dedicate to learning and understanding what a movement is? How can I do it where it's of value also to me and my life? And I think that that's a great place to start. I don't know if you would agree with that or what your thoughts are on how you've seen that sort of in real time on the ground.
Yeah, I think we are not experts on everything. We can know we're experts on our lives. I'm an expert on my life. And what's been helpful for me as I've even developed and grown is just making the connections between what is happening in my life and what's happening at a larger scale. Not in a way that's like overwhelming and that I'm just like kind of hyper over focused on that. But in a way that allows me to say, like, look, there's somebody I can talk to about this. Like, I am not a powerless person. I can go and demand something for me and my community or me and my family. Like, and also I think shifting the mindset to think, okay, we actually already pay for these things. Like the government takes our tax money and they don't play about that. They don't play about their tax money. So they receive our tax money, but we get very little back. Depending on where you live in this country, like you might get very little back, you might get nothing back, you might get like the bare minimum, or you get might get a little more, right? So it's a matter of also kind of like claiming a bit of like entitlement in this situation, like, but we already paid you for the services. So why are the services not up to par? Like, why are we not getting what the people in Denmark and Scandinavia and Sweden and Spain and other places are getting, or even Canada? Why is it that we can't get the bare minimum, like health insurance, paid family leave, affordable childcare or free childcare even, and other, and other services, right? Like these are things that you and I, we already paid for. Um, and if you're a property owner, then you are paying it twice through your income and through your taxes on your property. So, it's like I think we all need to it's not something I was taught because of course as an immigrant in this country, it's like you're always taught like, to be grateful. And then as a Dominican woman, it's like calladita te ve más bonita. Like you better be quiet. Children are seen and not heard. And then that translates to be a beautiful woman, but don't make too many waves, right? So all of that cultural conditioning stacked on top of each other makes us be silent about our pain, and it makes us accept these crumbs that we're getting from our government. So it does become personal when I think we connect it to our own upbringing that sometimes, unfortunately, for some has conditioned some of us to accept that fate of being silenced and not asking or demanding for more.
Oof. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I think that that is exactly why we need to celebrate when we are able to stand up, to speak out, right? And to really break these molds because it's very easy, or so they say. They study this dream that it's easier to fall in line. But the reality is that you're like crawling out of your skin when something just doesn't feel right, when injustice is really calling you and sort of that inner drumming that happens. Like it's important to answer that call. And to your point, answer the call to the way that is actually connected to you and not get lost in the noise, which I think happens a lot, especially in the social media space. I want to move into our Tuta Loca es, where we shout out motherfuckers who are doing the most. And when I hear some Dominicans talking about anti-Haitian sentiments, sometimes I really just want to run and hide and crawl somewhere because I have a hard time holding space and grace for the ways that that is still very alive and thriving. And yet, having historical context, I can understand why they're stuck in that mentality and how there are further intersections that go just beyond anti Blackness that feed into that mentality, and nationalism being one of them. But what does it really mean to be a Dominican? I love that you shared that a lot of your learnings in history isn't just Trujillo and pre Trujillo, it's post Trujillo. And I say that because I think that in social spaces, especially online, when we are having some of these conversations around Dominican and Haitian relations, they make it seem like Antilles Cafe is something that could never exist. Almost like that's a myth. There is no way in hell that we would ever see these two people come together in an endeavor that way because it's inaccurate culturally and historically. We have no reason to come together in those ways. And so we had a previous episode where we talked a little bit about what does, this thing of, oh, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. And how like there are places where like, yeah, there are Dominicans that feel that way, but one, there are not Dominicans that feel all that way. But two, in the diaspora, the different strokes of what our experiences have been around race and surviving racism and the systems that pile onto those things has shaped and like in some way destroyed things, but that there are generations of people who are building to reverse that. And so the more that we just allow people to say, oh, all Dominicans don't think they're Black, is that helpful to people who are actually doing the work against that? I don't think that it's helpful, but I don't think that that means that we shouldn't call out the anti Blackness. So I'm just curious, what do you think some people are getting wrong about this Dominican Haitian relationship, both about where that hate is rooted from, but also the opportunities to support spaces that are actually doing the work to counter this?
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. That's a great question. So, I think what people get wrong about the DR and Haiti situation is that the hate that Dominicans have been taught has been in response to the fact that we are extremely close to Haiti. And historically, working class Dominican and mostly Black Dominicans have been in solidarity with Haiti throughout our history. And so I think that that's an important thing to kind of break down because in the 19th century, what you saw was over and over and over Black and enslaved and formerly enslaved people who would become Dominicans, right? Because, in 1804, there were no Dominicans. Those people took all this inspiration from the uprisings of the Haitian Revolution, beginning in literally like the late 1780s. There was inspiration from those uprisings that inspired Dominican abolitionists, is what we're going to call them, or pre-Dominican abolitionists, people who would become Dominicans, they were the first to begin self-abolishing slavery, right? Where it existed in the eastern side. And they were extremely inspired and supported by the Haitian rebels on the western side because it was clear and very obvious to everyone who had, been formerly enslaved or who was of African descent, that there was no way that you could have one part of the island be free and another part of the island be enslaved. That was like a very clear political understanding among peoples on both sides. And so a lot of the events that unfold after the Haitian Revolution have everything to do with this power struggle between the Dominican elites and the Dominican everyday people who were very interested in this project of freedom that Haiti had created. Not only were they interested, they were in their own way actively participating by welcoming Haitian leaders into the eastern side to fully abolish slavery. And so that is like one, like the most kind of critical point of departure is that these 200 years plus of anti-Haitian narrative have been written by an elite, the Dominican elite, who were the descendants of the very people that Haitians fought against, and on the eastern side, the descendants of people who had people enslaved, right? And so their interest in writing the narrative of the nation was to create a new colonial structure where this vast majority of Black and Afro descendant people could be marginalized. And so that is like if we can agree on that, if we can kind of like depart on that from that, then the rest of the history that we work with and we tell adding culture makes sense. Because when you start looking at new sources, you start reading the text differently, you start thinking of historical events in a more nuanced way, you start reading primary sources, and you realize that this narrative, this victorious narrative of Dominicans fighting against Haitians to create their own nation and then everyone lived happily ever after, that is not the narrative of what happened. Like the actual political reality is far more complex. And so that's what I would say. It's like one thing that we have to kind of understand is like departing from this clarity around slavery, around freedom, around how the people who would become Dominicans really desired their freedom and fought like over and over again for it. And then you add that influence of like the elites shaping the narrative, right? Like struggling to form the nation in their image, right, with very specific reasons for that, then you get the recipe for what we have in the Dominican Republic, which is a population that is, that is miseducated around history, around roots, and a national identity that refuses to really grapple with race and what it means, right? And social difference and racial difference and hierarchy. Um, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's what
I
I would
think that
say.
that's really well put, and I think that a lot of people fail to understand that nuance. First of all, if we even take it a step further and think about the way people view this history from one being somebody who was actually born and raised in Dominican Republic, and I say that because we're talking about people who were then raised in a school system that was teaching them a particular history about Dominicans versus a Dominican American first generation, second generation who is now here in the United States is a very proud Dominican, right? Is also having to engage this narrative around Dominican-Haitian relation, but through a lens of a Eurocentric educational canon here in the United States that has given them even less detail about this. And then you get the two together, right? And whether, let's say, we're talking about people who don't necessarily feel their work is rooted in combating anti-Blackness and all of these things, and they just want to go with historical facts. Then we get these two people together, and we have some of the miseducation that is happening literally in the school system, not just a personal choice, with again another group of people who have been exposed to this and do not have the language and sort of framework for how to include what it does mean to combat anti-Blackness or have anti-Blackness be part of the narrative, but also what Black liberation means and what that meant in the context of that work that was happening on both sides of the island at different periods of time throughout our history. And so then we give these people a megaphone called the internet. And suddenly we have people who are like making these egregious statements around our history, our people, why we get to feel the way we feel about Haitians or not. And it's really created a cloud that for me as somebody who is an artist, a storyteller, I care very deeply about the source of a story, and I get very easily overwhelmed with the way that people don't do their research and don't take a moment to pause because it's just, again, an upbringing. It's a framework. It's a way that they've been socialized. And people are so unwilling to decolonize their mind and do that decolonization work. And also to admit, like, oh shit, maybe there is something that was intentional about the way I learned what I learned. And even though I'm saying, oh, but that's what I learned in school, but oh, you wouldn't know any better because you're from America. I've heard that a lot from even like, people in family who are like, you think you know Dominican history, you didn't go to school in DR, you don't know our history better than us. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know the experience of the history better than you, perhaps, but I do know certain facts that are written and documented. And, Maury is saying, you are the father. Like, this is the problem. Like, this is the connection. And so it's so hard to bridge that sometimes
Mhm.
because that national pride is so embedded. And not even that when we do talk about Dominican origin and history, they love to dig into the Taino aspect real hard, which is great. Like, we're Taino, but guess what? In Haiti, también habían Taino. Like, you know what I mean? So when we're talking about these things and we're trying to box people out without being like, well, hold up, we can say Taino, but then that actually is something that it then also creates another layer of connection between these two people on opposite sides of an island that didn't want to necessarily be what it has become, but even in what it has become, still has an opportunity to reflect some of the equity and unity that was there in inception. And if we don't do our work and our homework to really understand the value in doing that, that we're missing
Mhm.
out on a lot. There's a lot of people that all they can say is, I know Haiti is destroyed. Esa gente ni creen en Dios. I hear all the time. And I'm like, really?
Yeah. There is a lot of narrative change work to do, right? Because prior to Trujillo, the people who had the opportunity, right? They had the leisure, they had the literacy, they had the access to the printing presses. Those people were people from, the elites of society in Dominican Republic. And their interest was in creating a boogeyman, creating an enemy, creating a distinction, a separation from Haiti for the purpose of proving to the US, who they wanted to trade with and to have investments with, that they were in Haiti. Because another part of this is that Haiti has always been marginalized because of the Haitian Revolution, right? This event that kicked off the end of slavery in the whole hemisphere. So the punishment that Haiti has received it's so detailed and it's so violent and it encompasses so many different spheres. And the Dominican Republic, the elites on the other side of the country, their interest throughout the 19th century was differentiating themselves from Haiti because people knew where Haiti was. They were like, this place where this happened. People didn't know what a thing called Dominican Republic was. And in
Mm.
fact, some of the folks at the time, right after 1844, would call the whole island Haiti. They didn't recognize a thing called Dominican Republic, right? And so you have this issue for the elites of the country where they're trying to differentiate themselves. They are white. The entire population is mostly black. Their neighbor is mostly black. And they're trying to signal to the US, look, we are not like them. We are not like them. And so like over and over, like that repetition, that attempt, that political effort to say we are not like them is where you get a lot of these quirky, random things inside of Dominican culture. Like, the idea that you will put Indio as a way for people to identify in a social in an ID card where you could, identify by your quote unquote skin color, and you would put Indio. That is not a classification that exists in any other place. That is not, and we respect the culturally specific ways that people end up identifying in their countries. And also, we understand that that came from a place of wanting to give folks who look like us, right, me and tan, light brown people, a way to say, but we're not black, right? And so I think there's so many events when that has happened. There's so many moments when that has happened. This like intentional pivot that then gets imposed on the rest of society. And then it's repeated over and over and over and over again until it becomes the truth, right? Trujillo hired his own army of writers to really write Dominican history. It is not till he's assassinated till the mid 1960s. That was 50, 60 years ago, right? That we get texts by Dominican historians that are Afrocentric and Black focused. We don't get those texts till 50 years ago, literally. So imagine if, like, let me put it in a comparison point, right? For African Americans after the Civil War, they were able to begin writing their own stories and going to their own schools and finding a way to narrate their own identity pretty immediately, right? But even before the Civil War, but pretty immediately after emancipation. It took Dominicans, Black people in our country, more than 100 years after that to be able to start freely, really freely writing from a Black centered perspective, right? And so when you think about that, and like those texts did not become the canon, we have them, and I have a whole list that I can share with your folks, right? But it did not become the canon at all, right? It's part of our fabric, but it did not become the canon. And so I think that all those factors have to factor into how we understand the particularities of race in the Dominican Republic. But I think also what's interesting is that the research is also showing that Dominicans have a very nuanced understanding of race and difference, right? Like they understand that when they go out of the country, they are seen differently. They're not seen as Dominican, they're seen as Black, right? So there's that factor. And then the other factor, which is kind of like the tea that nobody wants to talk about, is the fact that these racial structures and systems are serving a large portion of our population, right? Like the fact that there is an underclass of Black Dominican youth and also Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent in Dominican Republic, the fact that there is this like underlayer of working class people to be like los jardineros, like lo delivery, to be the construction workers, to be the nannies, to be like the house cleaners, to be the hotel work, that is beneficial to the 20 families that own everything, and it's also beneficial to the middle class that is also attempting to build wealth, right? Like, you got that apartment building built for a lower cost because you underpay the workers y después llamaste a la camiona to avoid paying them. And then you're gonna flip that and make millions and millions of pesos, if not dollars. So, it's not just about, oh, like my own personal sentiments about like these people. It's also about, hey, like we're actually exploiting collectively this vast population of people. And then when there's too many of them, or when it's like problematic to have them incorporated into society, we're going to go ahead and spend the past 25 years, which I have plenty of documentation for, finding legal ways to exclude, marginalize, and deport that population. So that is unethical. That is exactly what the US government is doing to Dominicans in the US right now. So it's not just about people's sentiments and people's feelings about what about having a Haitian neighbor, or that interpersonal relationship. That is important, but it's also important for Dominicans to come clean and start acknowledging that we are, as a nation, have benefited from this racial hatred and exploitation.
I literally have nothing to say because you said it all. That investigation is super important. And again, as an artist and storyteller, knowing that the arts is a space where oftentimes people's cult and here in the States get platformed easiest or first, right? Which means we get to set the tone for the assumptions and even in some ways the stereotypes, even though we're not trying to make them stereotypes that people assume about Dominicans. And I love Dominican American pride. I love that we like to shout out. We love waving our flag everywhere. But I think we do ourselves a disservice if we are saying, hey, yeah, I want to represent my people and blah, 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 but we don't actually know from whence we came as a people and all of these different aspects that we are immediately faced with. Because again, the biggest thing, anytime I've come into a space as a storyteller around Dominicans, the first story that I am asked about or confronted about is this idea that we don't think we're Black or we hate Black people. And if I don't know, and I only know a fraction, if I don't know even just that little fraction that I know, I leave a lot of room for more misunderstanding and for me to even double down on some of these stereotypes in a really problematic way, even if that wasn't my intention. But because I don't know what I'm talking about, it's very easy for me to give license and room for people to say really wild shit about Dominicans and about Haitians, but in a way that, again, overshadows the hard work and true history of what that unity has looked like and continues to look like even today. So that is my message to all of us people who are platformed and storytellers. And like, we have to be conscious. It doesn't mean we have to become the historian, but it's very important if we're going to stand on that platform, if we're going to use our identity as the thing that builds our audiences and builds out our niches, like it is exploitative of us to keep running on a particular trope and stereotype because it's popular and not actually do justice to the people who have died doing this even. So
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for saying that, because I think we don't talk about that enough. Like, because Dominicans, as a community, we're growing in the US. Dominicans are the largest immigrant group in New York City. And we also have the kind of like our hands and our hand in the pulse of the culture, right? Like, there was a point where everybody was making dembow, everybody was making merengue or other things, right? So we're in this interesting moment where like we have probably the most like political power as a small community that we've had, and the most cultural capital as a community that we probably have ever had. But we're also caught in the crossfire between the Dominican government's fascist policies and their anti-Black policies, and the US government's anti-Black policies, right? And so our question in this moment that we're in, the question that we want to answer is, well, how do we actually want to show up? And we can't show up in the US without dealing with what's going on in Dominican Republic. I don't want to just represent Dominicans. Who am I to represent all Dominicans? I don't think that is appropriate, but I want to honor the Dominican freedom fighters who are part of my national lineage. I want to honor Gregorio Luperon. I want to honor so many, so many who have fought, and like the list is very large. I want to honor, the legacies of so many people who were not just fighters, they were also intellectuals, they were storytellers, they were creatives, they were poets, they were artists, they were doctors. There is such a rich heritage of resistance to colonial and imperial violence, and also anti-blackness, and also anti-Haitianism, right? Like Encultured Co is not like the first to try to do this work. Like we sit on the shoulders of 50 years of experiments on like formal movement work to try to resist the Dominican state's violence. And then before that, we sit on the shoulders of guerrilla fighters, people who fought against Spain, people who fought against slavery, abolitionists, right? Like we are just now beginning to scratch the surface of like true Black history in the Dominican Republic. Like we're just now getting those texts, and that's what we do. We take that information which is inaccessible to the broader public because it's expensive or is behind a paywall, and we bring it out through our Decolonizing Hispaniola conference. We want people to just come in and prepare to have their world flipped upside down, because the story that we have been told has been told to advantage a very small group of very wealthy people in our country. And at the end of the day, that's what we want, to create that consciousness among our community.
Very necessary work. I honor it. I'm grateful. This is also why you're here. We need to just start including this in the natural conversations of what we're doing day to day. I want to move us to our last topic of the plate of the day, which really coincides with this really beautifully, and I think is some of the work that Encultured Co was doing, which is to create models for centering community over capitalism. Right? Socialization teaches us that there's different agents that socialize us, and Cultured Co hits certain layers of that, but there are so many intersections between what socializes us and how capitalism shows up at each intersection, whether that's how it affects the home, which we talked about a little bit earlier when we were talking about people who are experiencing insecurity, whether that is the institutions that we work at or are educated in, and how money affects how those things get to flourish and nourish us or not. So media, government, capitalism everywhere, but in the ways that the capitalistic beast has always been very strong in this country, it has decentered community in such a big way. And I don't even just mean community as in like, oh, communities who are marginalized. The ways in which people could even know their neighbor and have a coexistence in a community with each other, whether they were of the same racial background or not, has really shifted. And it's one of the things where when I think about what I feel privileged in being a Dominicana who can go to DR and visit family and spend a good amount of time there, is that I feel a stronger sense of community and culture that is just kind of natural in the way that we move. And when I think about, well, how is that missing here in the States, or what is preventing that? I think about how we are the means of productions. We, as our bodies, are the means of production. And so we are just worried about our work and producing. So I don't know my neighbors. Like, for example, I live in this building here in beautiful Denver, Colorado. I'm sure they're nice people. I don't know them. Why? We walk, we're going in and out of work. Everybody's living their life. There is nothing that makes us say we're sharing space with each other. How do we center each other's needs? Because we're more powerful if we together as a building, let's say, knew each other and understood how we can or can't support each other for when insecurity, like this whole SNAP benefit. For all I know, my neighbors needed support, but we won't even look each other in the eye. And there's just this individual mindset that has really, I think, infected the individual, but really started at a systemic level before we had decades and decades of losing that community centering. So I would love to hear from you. One, how do you define capitalism? Because people will be like, oh, you say capitalism, what are you even talking about? So I want to give us a chance to see how you frame capitalism, but also share how the work that you're doing is building a framework or model around decentering capitalism and allowing for community to be centered, and that not meaning that wealth is not part of the equation or that resource is not part of the equation, which is, I think, the first thing people assume is like, oh, you want to pull capitalism, but what are we going to do about money? You're running too fast. Like, let's take it one step at a time. So
Yeah, well, great ending question. So, the way that I define capitalism is that it is a system of resource extraction and exploitation that necessitates, it's always searching for a new way to extract profit from humans, from nature, and from the planet, right? From humans and from the planet. So that's the way I would define it. It's a very simple definition for me because it centers the fact that again, capitalism always requires a new source of profit. It always needs something new to exploit and to generate revenue from. So there was a point in time where that source of revenue was people like me and you, like enslaved people, right? That was the raw source of profit. There was a point in time when the source of raw profit that was exploited was just nature itself, right? Like coal mines, just oil extraction, right? All of that. Now, the new form of capitalist accumulation is actually data, right? Like our thoughts, our data, our input. That is how capital is now reproducing itself. So, to me, what that means is that there's never been a or there in recent human history, right, since capitalism began, um, and I think also I wanna say that people confuse capitalism with entrepreneurship. And I
Mm,
wanna make sure that there is a difference, right? Like, you could be as an entrepreneur because you sell lo producto de tu conuco and you barter for them, with your neighbors, like, "I'll take the milk and the eggs, you take these balole these guineos," and that's entrepreneurship, right? You're bartering, you are trading, you are, circulating. There's a world in which that doesn't actually generate any capital and at all, any profit. So there's that distinction. With capital, the thing about capital is that you always want to take that revenue, you always want to take what you have and always make more. There's always a need for growing more of it, right? And to grow more of it, to take those $5 and turn them into $100, the leap that to go from 5 to 100 is that you have to find a way to exploit labor and resources to take that input and build that out into more. And so that's what I mean by the process in which capital is always searching for its new way that it's going to take what it has and maximize, right? And you can't do that without exploitation. That is there's very few ways that you can have that level of growth without exploitation. So
mhm,
that's what I'll say just to like kind of like lay the groundwork. And so as a result of that, community has been thrown to the wayside because if you're always searching for new territories to exploit, what capital is not interested in community. Capital is interested in how do I make more from what I have, right? And how do I actually move freely around the world to exploit, right? And to find new places where I can grow. Whereas community and our my understanding of community is these deep relationships, right? These deep kind of powerful, connected, long-term relationships, which are the way that our people have historically lived and been able to survive. Our people have not been inside of capitalism for that long. There were folks who were entrepreneurs. There were folks who were able to survive, literally bartering with each other. But as far as like a thing called capital and having vast amounts of wealth to invest and to grow, that is a very recent development in the Dominican Republic, right? That is like a post Trujillo development, and my research actually traces how that happened with the development of a mining industry in the early 1970s. That was a very new, fresh thing that occurred, and we're now seeing that really kind of bear fruit more recently with Barrick Gold and DR. So the point is that understanding what capitalism is and what it's doing to the social fabric is a critical thing, right? And so choosing to reject that and choosing in big ways or small ways, right? Like is a big task. Like it's not an easy task, right? It takes a lot of like being willing to lean into some very feminine traits, actually, is what I wanted to say, because women, we have been socialized, not just that we inherently are that way. We have been raised and socialized to be mindful of others' needs, right? To be thoughtful about what is going on around us, who needs us, what do they need, right? And so, in a family situation where you're the person who's always the caretaker and your boundaries are being constantly violated, that is not necessarily a good thing because it means that you're always like the person who's overextending. If you want to take that skill set and use it towards cultivating closer community and understanding who's around you, what do they need, I think that's a better use of that skill set, right? Than just kind of having it be used against you in some situations. Um, but there is a need to sort of lean into a very just like a thoughtful version of femininity that is not just like this girl boss capitalist like, be on, like I'm just gonna become a content influencer and make $1 million. And it's like that is a possibility that could happen. And also like maybe you would spend that time also building sustainable relationships that are gonna carry you to old age so that you don't feel like you're so precarious, because that's also what we feel, like this very big sense of precarity. And community is what's able to like get us through, right? Like I think about the ways that people in DR, like you take like the most basic ingredients, like the cheapest ingredients, and you turn that into like an event, un locro de pica pica en el rio, or like, like literally like anything becomes an event. Like what we are able to create a moment of respite from capitalism through our cooking, right? And through our gatherings. So I think that there's a lot to dig into. I think from my perspective, doing the work of Incultured is not like a big funded organization, right? This organization runs on volunteer labor. And it's gotten this far on volunteer labor. I'm sure we could go further. But the beautiful things that I'm seeing are regular people like choosing to step up and break out of their bubble and like lean into community and like build true relationships, I'm seeing it with like Zoran's campaign where like regular people were like, you know what, I'm gonna be a field lead and I'm gonna like, like host events and I'm gonna like canvas and I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that. And I think that's how we really like move into this next phase of what this country needs to be like, what our lives under capitalism are. And to be honest, it's not going to last forever. Like we might not see the end of capitalism ourselves, but what's going on is that like the system is stalling because there are no new sources of input for the system to kind of like triple or quadruple or, whatever, quintillion, whatever, right? Like the planet only has so many resources, we're running out. And the US government is literally trying to go to war with Venezuela to get more resources, right? Like this is not sustainable. The AI bubble will pop at some point. So it's kinda like, like what's left after that for capital? I don't know. What's gonna be the new and latest thing that it's gonna try to exploit? I don't know. But more of us are like rejecting this way of doing things, because we recognize that the only reason why it's functioning this way, the only reason why it's now more generative to human life is because like 30 men are like, we really want to be trillionaires. And it's kind of like, is that really sustainable for the rest of us? I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah. I wanna touch on what you said about AI because as you were speaking, I was like, yeah, and I think that right now there's a very strong campaign to convince people on any intersection, whether you are a self-made worker or you are working under capitalism for a particular company, that this AI is this magic wand that is going to make everything easier for us. And so the more that we accommodate it, the more the data centers and there are data centers here in the States, but we're also, as we always do, propping these things up overseas and hurting communities and picking even areas that have been under drought to prop up something that needs more water, in a space where the humans are having a hard time getting the water to begin with. That we convince ourselves it is worth it. It is worth the cost of lives, of money, in order and resource and like, a
Mhm.
planet to do this because it's going to make it all easier because that's what's going to make it last. And so I think that things like AI are being sort of dangled in our face as a way to keep the comforts of capitalism, which is really what I think makes people afraid to reimagine what our community systems can look like without centering capitalism in the ways that it is centered. This idea that if we do have 30 guys who are trying to be trillionaires, then what's the harm in me trying to be a millionaire out of however many people in the circle, but not holding yourself accountable to the fact that you are still, even at a different level, causing the same kinds of harm as the trillionaire, but maybe your proximity to the people you're harming might be even worse than what some of these trillionaires get to actually have in proximity. But because we don't want to release this idea of wealth and being the richest and the most powerful, we have that is part of, to me, the decolonization work. The same systems that came into, our countries and spaces to take over and do all of this once upon a time to build up what it is now, which it's something to be proud of in one sense, but in other senses has really snuffed out and killed other ways that our communities knew how to coexist, and not just indigenous, right? Because sometimes people are like, oh, well, we don't want to go back to being indigenous. Look what they had. And it's like, yes, and there are modern versions of that are evolved that still center community and the planet and sustainability overall. And that people don't know how to be happy with enough. People always think they need more than enough to actually find joy. And so I think that some of that resistance work in centering community is also allowing people to understand what true wealth is in a way that feels comfortable and sustainable, and that there are people who are like, look, I'm going to be the commodity that keeps this wheel going. I'm going to be the Amazon worker. I'm going to be the whatever enter company here, because at the end of the day, I still have to feed my kids, because they don't necessarily have a community system that they can rely on to say, oh no, like I can do this other kind of work and my kids won't go hungry because this is the way that community sustains and feeds each other. But I think if we can figure that out, to your point of capitalism can't last forever at this rate, if we can get ahead of its fall and start to build these systems, and as it's crumbling, I don't think it needs to threaten our communities as much as I fear it will affect our communities as it crumbles, because by then they'll have their rocket ships or they'll be in their bunkers or lo que sea, and they're going to be fine. Nosotros somos lo que vamos a estar jodidos.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% hear you, and, like, one book that really influenced me in my development was a book called Parable of the Sower by
Yes.
Octavia
I,
Butler.
yes.
That
I read
that
that.
trilogy is, like, critical and so important because it is exactly what we're saying. This young person in the book sees the crumbling happening and decides, "Actually, I'm gonna lead a community. I'm gonna create something that is real and sustainable where we really need each other to survive." And these are the people who I wanna, like, be with, right? Because I think also another thing to, like, the illusion of what can be possible, under capitalism is that we're in this moment where ownership is slipping away from our generation and the younger generations, right? The US government is trying to put together a 50-year mortgage and tell us that that's a good thing. And it's like, well, if I buy my house when I'm 30 and it's a 50-year mortgage, and if I die before I pay it off, did I just like rent my whole life? Like, what did I just do? Like, mortgages should be 15 to 20 years. They should not be 30 or 50 years. So we're also in this moment where it's like, well, you as an individual, you might be perhaps okay, but your descendants, your children, or if you don't have children, like your kin, like your younger, they're not gonna do well. So keeping the system going by not making, or contributing to radical change might benefit you to keep things going, but ultimately, it's not gonna keep you safe, right? It's not gonna keep people, around you safe because the whole thing is being set up so that nobody owns anything. You don't own your car, you don't own your home, you're in credit card debt all the time, like, you can't buy groceries, so it's like, I just want people to know that that's not normal, like, that's not a normal way to exist, and I think more of us are waking up to say, like, "Look, this is not a normal way to exist." I had a huge wake up, I was like, I had a job as a college professor. I was gonna be a professor at the new school, and I was very proud that out of, like, 400 people or however many people, I got the job, and I was ready to teach on these topics. And then I realized, well, the students are gonna be in 80,000, it's $80,000 a year of debt, so they're gonna walk out of here with $250,000 in debt. Is that okay? Am I gonna be able to be okay with that?
Mm,
At night, to say like, oh, I'm contributing to this system when college should be free, like pre-K should be free, like schools should be well funded, like, all these different things. I'm like, if I have enough time, if I'm here on this earth, then I want to contribute to liberating these resources in this system from the capitalist machinery that it's under, instead of like being comfortable with contributing to something that's not even giving me enough to live, to be totally honest, to keep it a buck. So again, that's what I would say. It's like you can close your eyes for a bit and like kind of like try to like chug along, but eventually it's gonna catch up to you that like it's an illusion of safety, right? It's an illusion of, the stock market is an illusion of confidence, right? Like, so all these things, like what we need to get back to is community ownership, cooperative ownership, which flourishes in many parts of the world, including here. There's cooperative ownership of many assets here. We need to reverse what has happened over the past 50 years, because as soon as people of color became a growing population in the US, all the systems tip toward debt and debt slavery for many people. It's like as soon as there were too many Black students and too many Latinx students and too many XYZ on college campuses, college wasn't free no more, right?
mm.
Like, how interesting that that's how when that happened, right? And so, where I'm not blind to the racial dynamics of it all, and I still say our job is to be in real community and in organizations, like in radical and revolutionary organizations that are multiracial and believe in multiracial democracy, so that we can somehow organize our way out of this, because it is not sustainable. We know that.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And so before all of the conversations and podcasts that I have, I like to pull animal wisdom cards. I am that girl, right? And the cards that came out for us were the eagle and the butterfly. And the eagle speaks of tapping into your sense of self and getting new perspectives, like flying to higher heights to really gauge the levels of freedom that you have access to if you are willing to pivot your perspective. And the butterfly, as we know, speaks of transformation, right? Are you ready to change? Are you in touch with which area you are in? Are you in the chrysalis? Are you already out in the butterfly? Are you still a caterpillar? But I think in combination, the eagle and the butterfly come with the message to tell us, you all, we can free ourselves from these systems that have really drowned us and have extorted us, but also turned us against each other in ways that has really given power to the wrong people. And the more that we can fly to new heights and think about how we can transform in order to gain that freedom, we really, really will do ourselves a service to try to make up for what is a lot of lost time. But don't let the hard lessons of the past and what our ancestors, and not even the super old ones back in the days, even the most recent ones, right? Like what they have had to go through is something that we can learn from and something we can thrive from if we choose to organize. So, Sally, thank you so, so, so much for all of the fucking context. And just, I knew this shit was going to be fire. I was so happy to have you on here. Please tell us, where can we find you and continue to support any of the work that you are doing?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so lovely to talk. So I'm always at Encultured Co. That's our handle on all platforms. And my personal is Dr. Saudi underscore. So you can also find me there. I am infrequent with my posts, but I try to share about my life. And I'm also my day job. People don't know I have a day job, but my day job is with an organization called Scholars for Social Justice. I'm a program director there, and I work with faculty members across the US who are trying to organize for progressive left causes in their communities and their campuses. So that's me. That's where I'm at. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Yes, thank you. And you can find us at Ladies Who Brunch across all platforms. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. And until next time, Bronche.